Good evening, I'm Savannah Kelly. Welcome to APTN National News. It was a historic day in Manitoba as Wab Kinew was sworn in as Premier. As Sav Jonesa tells us, the province's first First Nations Premier also made history with his cabinet.
The ceremony started with the lighting of the hulik, a traditional Inuit lamp. Then, with an opening prayer by Chief Sam Knott of Red Sucker Lake, Duck Bay's Kevin Chief announced the Norman Chief Memorial Dancers and the Red River Jig, a Métis anthem.
All you got to do is every once in a while give it a try. You'll walk into the legislature with a bit of skip in your step.
Kyra Wilson, Chief of Long Plain First Nation, gave the land acknowledgement.
On behalf of Long Plain First Nation, the leadership, and the peoples of Treaty 1 First Nation, I would like to say anin and good day to you all.
Former judge and chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Senator Murray Sinclair, also spoke.
It really is Manitoba's true act of reconciliation, and I want you to think of it that way. I want you to think of the fact that we are now entering a new phase.
As Kinew becomes the first Premier of First Nation descent in Manitoba, his 15-member cabinet is also breaking new ground. There are 4 Indigenous cabinet ministers in total, with St. John's MLA Nahani Fontaine being the first First Nations woman in a Manitoba cabinet.
I present to you for the first time in Manitoba's history a First Nations woman to join our province's cabinet. I present to you the Honourable Nahani Fontaine.
Point Douglas MLA Bernadette Smith will be Minister of Housing, Addictions, and Homelessness. Ian Bushy from Hollowater First Nation is Minister of Municipal and Northern Relations, as well as Minister of Indigenous Economic Development. Métis MLA Renee Cable is Minister of Advanced Education and Training. Uzoma Asagwara, elected in 2019 as MLA for Union Station, was appointed Deputy Premier and Minister of Health, Seniors, and Long-Term Care. Asagwara, a former psych nurse, is Manitoba's first non-binary MLA and the first queer Black MLA elected in Manitoba's history. With a cabinet made up of people from every walk of life, it's a strong signal as to where Kinew wants to steer the province. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Chiefs from the Mohawk Council of Kanesatake in Quebec are calling for the resignation of their Grand Chief after he attempted to place the community under third-party management. Maricela Amador has more.
Disruptive events in the community.
Battle of words and will is taking place at the Mohawk Council of Kanesatake. Chief Brant Etienne said he and his fellow chiefs were left stunned when they saw a letter from Indigenous Service Canada. It refused Grand Chief Victor Bonspiel's request for third-party management.
We don't want that for Kanesatake. We've been there before. It took us a long time and a lot of hard work to get out of it.
However, Bonspiel remains undeterred and said that he is continuing with his mandate as Grand Chief.
Well, it was a hard decision. It wasn't something that I just decided to do. It took some contemplating.
Moreover, the Grand Chief alleges that his council chiefs are doing everything to try and oust him.
The only way that I seen that I could stop them from micromanaging every department, including and especially finances, is to request that from the federal government.
According to Indigenous Service Canada, the last time Kanesatake was placed under third-party management was in 2003, when the community was in a precarious financial situation. It ended in 2006. The chiefs have also compiled a list of actions by the Grand Chief they claim demonstrate he is unfit for office. One of them is the handling of GNR recycling, a toxic dump site which has caused an environmental crisis in the community.
Unfortunately, the Grand Chief, for whatever reason, organized with the current owners of the GNR lands to have them relinquish title to that property, and it would revert to the community.
Advocates have been calling for its remediation, but Chief Brant Etienne disagrees with the Grand Chief's plan to deal with it.
Those lands need to be cleaned up, but the financial cost and burden, the legal burden, the criminal burden, can't fall on the community. We literally can't afford it.
But the Grand Chief refuted that claim. He said he was only following the government's directive to facilitate the remediation process.
And one of those was to, in fact, have GNR sign over the land. The federal government does not remediate or fund any privately owned properties. So it had to be reverted back to council.
APTN said that if Bonsfield doesn't resign, council will hold a referendum, followed by a vote of non-confidence. The Grand Chief said that he will continue to carry out the will of the people.
Well, if they're gonna direct us to have or direct me to call a general election, then that's their will. I'm not going back on my word.
Maricela Amador, APTN National News, Kanesatake, Quebec.
Assembly of First Nations leaders were in Ottawa Wednesday morning to formally announce the organization's national climate strategy. The strategy urges government and industry to adopt First Nations systems of knowledge as a means of fighting the current climate crisis. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
AFN Interim National Chief Joanna Bernard says regularly occurring climate disasters have become the new reality.
This means that more extreme weather, including fires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, species migration, coastal sea level rise, among other challenges. In the face of this reality and observations from knowledge keepers, First Nations have taken matters into their own hands.
The climate strategy was 4 years in the making and includes 7 priority areas, which call upon the government and industry to explore climate change solutions through a First Nations lens.
Natural law.
AFN Quebec Labrador Regional Chief Ghislain Picard says First Nations have often been left out of climate change discussions in the past, but the time to change this is now.
Because of our close connection to the lands and waters, I think First Nations are in a unique position to bring guided solutions in terms of the climate challenge. We understand that it's the challenge is for all of us.
Delegates from across Canada passed the National Climate Strategy at the AFN Summer Assembly in July. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We need to step aside for a short break, but we have plenty of news still to come. Stay with us. Welcome back to APTN National News. There's a rich history of hunting and trapping in Canada's largest national park. But despite long-standing cultural practices in wood buffalo, some Indigenous groups have been pushed to the fringes. Our reporter Charlotte Morit-Jacobs brings us to Fort Smith, Northwest Territories for that story.
Ken Hudson has been hunting all his life, but it hasn't been easy. For decades, he's been fighting tooth and nail for recognition of past wrongs and inherent rights for Métis and Treaty 8 territory.
Large chunks of our own land, including Wood Buffalo Park, we couldn't hunt. And we can't hunt in Alberta, Saskatchewan, places that other Aboriginal people that were here, we're standing next to them, have those rights.
With Treaty 8, First Nations in the area have been afforded hunting and trapping rights in Canada's largest national park. But Métis who were there at the time of treaty signing in 1899 were not included. In 2016, Hudson was the president of the Fort Smith Métis Council and was part of the NWT Métis Nation, who demanded the federal government provide $120 million in compensation and a formal apology for this mistreatment. But the issues with the park have been tied into the ongoing work around Métis land claim and self-government.
It just drags on. We're after reconciliation for what they did to us in the park as well. So that's at the negotiating table. Now this issue here of the government cheating us out of a treaty or an agreement at treaty time is a separate issue. But they're tied to the table, which they shouldn't be.
President of NWT Métis Nation, Gary Bailey, has been at the negotiating table since 1997.
No formulas for the land transfer, formulas for compensation. So it's pretty well like starting all over again and taking 10 to 20 years because, you know, anything that you put forward, you're going to have to prove your case. So which means there's got to be studies and so on done for each thing to figure out what your losses really are.
He also says Canada's insistence in lumping in all Métis issues for redress has been stalling any progress.
Can't be holding us at ransom, you know, saying if you want it this bad, give this and this and this and this, give it up.
Meanwhile, back at Hudson's house, insult to injury.
And this bill now is $5,326.86. I won't be paying that one, that's for sure.
Outstanding bills from the territorial government to use his traditional territory.
For us to get charged for building cabins, for harvesting, and for showing our grandkids.
Both Bailey and Hudson say they've been told by colonial government that the territory has the right to levy taxes on Crown lands, as long as it doesn't affect Indigenous ways of life. A way of life that Métis will continue to practice while being charged to do so. Charlotte Morit-Jacobs, APTN National News, Fort Smith.
Indigenous leaders in Australia are asking for a week of silence and reflection after the country voted 60% against recognizing Indigenous people in the former British colony's 122-year-old constitution. Natalie Ahmad is head of the National Indigenous Television Network's Current Affairs branch in Australia. She also anchors the network's newscast. She spoke with Dennis Ward earlier to share some reflections of her own on this story.
Thanks for joining us, Natalie. Why do Indigenous peoples want their rights entrenched in Australia's constitution?
Well, we wanted this voice to Parliament, which was the proposition that we recently voted on at the weekend, enshrined in the Constitution so that it could never be taken away, basically. Indigenous people here came together and called for this advisory body, this voice to Parliament. We have had representative bodies and advisory bodies in the past here in Australia, but they've been able to be abolished by the government of the day. So the reason it was so important to many people to change it in the Constitution was so that that voice, that advisory body, couldn't be taken away. But sadly, Australians voted at the weekend that they didn't want to change the Constitution.
What do you think this recognition of Indigenous rights in the Constitution would have meant, in everyday terms?
I think it just would have made Indigenous people here in this country felt seen and heard. You know, we are the first peoples of this continent, now called Australia. We have, we're one of the oldest living cultures in the world. We go back 65,000 years, yet we're simply not acknowledged in Australia's constitution, in the nation's birth certificate. So I think, recognition would have meant a lot to Indigenous people here and would have helped us then build on that and move forward. You know, there are also calls that came out of the same document that called for the voice to Parliament for treaty and for truth-telling. So this was seen as the first step towards those things and really kind of, I guess, coming together and accepting this country's past, which, like where you are in your country, hasn't been the best. There's been many atrocities committed against our people. So this was sort of seen as the first step towards, treaty making and truth telling in this country.
Yeah, given that shared history, I saw a lot of people online here in Canada saying, well, not a big shock here that this has happened. But what do you think was behind this being voted down?
I think there were a number of reasons, one of which I think perhaps people didn't understand, potentially what the change that was being asked for. So there was a very sort of successful slogan going around that if you don't know, vote no. And it sort of appears, and I'm no pollster, but it sort of appears that that might have been what's happened. I think, we only make up 3% First Nations people here in Australia of the population. There have been many surveys done over the years that show that 80% of Australians, particularly those that live in cities, have never come in contact with an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. So, they're being asked to vote on an issue to do with, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs, and they don't really understand because they don't have any Aboriginal friends. So, or they don't, have an understanding of the issues that are facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There's obviously a lot of other things going on in the world right now that are sort of dominating the news cycle. Cost of living is a huge issue here in Australia, and I think there was a feeling that, to many people, that they wanted to see the politicians and the government addressing other issues as opposed to Indigenous issues. So, and I think, not a lot of people understand constitutional law. I'm sure that's probably a pretty universal thing. So a lot of people couldn't understand why the need to change the constitution. So, they voted no. But having said that, there is a whole range of reasons that we've heard as to why people voted no or yes, but certainly, yeah, as I said, I think a lot of it came down to people perhaps not being engaged with Indigenous issues and understanding why this was so important to so many First Nations people.
Just briefly here, Natalie, some are saying that this is a major blow for reconciliation in Australia. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was one of the stronger things we heard come out on Saturday night when the result became known, and it became known within 90 minutes of polls closing too. So it was a very sort of landslide defeat. And yeah, a lot of people said, look, this is the death of reconciliation in this country. We've had a few days pass now, and I think a lot of people say, okay, well, perhaps it's not the death knell for reconciliation in this country, but certainly it is seen as a major setback. I think a few people were, this is sort of now, I guess, being seen, the referendum, as a poll on, the state of reconciliation here, and some of us were surprised that it was such a landslide defeat. But there are also some positives that can come out of this in terms of we saw a lot of people, obviously 40% of Australia did vote yes, and we did see during the campaign leading into this referendum a lot of non-Indigenous Australians who had never engaged with Indigenous issues, never campaigned or advocated for Indigenous issues, come out in support of the yes vote. So I think we can take some hope there that we now have identified this amazing army of allies who can perhaps help us now, pick up the pieces and find a new way forward. It won't be through a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament, but certainly now we're waiting to plot out the way forward. Many of the supporters of the Yes campaign here in Australia have actually called for a week of silence this week. They called that on Saturday night. So we haven't heard a lot of people come out yet and start talking about the next steps. Currently, many of our First Nations people who were supportive of the Yes are taking a little bit of time out to heal, to be together, to yarn, and then I'm sure in the days ahead we'll start working out what the next steps are towards reconciliation in this country in light of Saturday night's referendum result.
Well, Natalie, we'll have to leave it there, but of course we'll be watching here as well. Appreciate you speaking with us this early in the morning for you.
Thanks so much for your time.
We need to take one more short break. Still to come, a look back at the wildfire season on In Focus. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Tess Potts in Vernon, British Columbia shared this stunning picture of the eclipse this past weekend. Thank you for sharing. If you want to be featured as our photo of the day, email your pictures to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, we've got 16 degrees in Charlottetown, 16 in Halifax. Nain, 9 degrees, Happy Valley Goose Bay, sunshine and 11 degrees. Val d'Or, rain, 11 degrees, Montreal, sunny, 17. Sarnia, 16 in showers, North Bay, 13 degrees and rain. Kapuskasing, rainy, 5 degrees, Big Trout Lake, 4 degrees. Churchill, 4 degrees, Puckatawagan, rainy, 6 degrees. Winnipeg, rainy and 15, Dauphin, sunshine, 17. Regina, sunshine and 20 degrees, North Battleford, 19 degrees. Stony Rapids, rainy and 11 degrees. Buffalo Narrows, sunshine and 15. Sunshine and 14 degrees in Fort McMurray. Peace River, 14. Calgary, sunshine, 19 degrees. Red Deer, mix of sun and cloud, 19. Vancouver, rainy, 16 degrees. Bella Coola, 11. Fort Nelson, 12 degrees and sunshine. Dease Lake, rainy and 10. Mayo, -1 and snow. Dawson, -2. Yellowknife, sunshine, 9 degrees. Wrigley, 6 degrees. Paulituck, 5 degrees and snow. Colville Lake, 2 degrees. Baker Lake, 1 degree, mix of sun and cloud. And Chesterfield, -1. Igloolik, rainy, -11. Arctic Bay, sunshine, -8. Canada saw its worst ever wildfire season this past summer. Almost 185,000 square kilometers of land burned. The Northwest Territories had ordered an evacuation of its capital city, Yellowknife, in August due to fires getting too close. To say climate change is on the rise is an understatement. So what are we doing to help with it? We put climate change in focus. Here's what was said.
We're seeing very little ice cover on the Great Lakes, which means that the role of the Great Lakes in moderating the temperature doesn't function as it normally did, and we're seeing warmer temperatures in the summer. And that's happening in other regions, whether that's impacts on the snow caps or permafrost. So we're seeing larger, and we're seeing conditions that are leading to more wildfires. And we're seeing the impact of unsustainable forest management practices over many years. So it has created the conditions for much of the forest in Canada to be susceptible to wildfires. So it's really a perfect storm that we're seeing today.
The difference between prescribed burning and cultural burning is from you're from the land and you know when a good day is to burn, and generally you burn in the springtime and the fall time in and around your communities to make it safe.
And that's all the time we have for your midweek news. For news anytime, head on over to our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly. Marcy Miigwech, thank you for joining us. Take care and have a great night.